There are great websites out there winning awards for the best web designs. The most prominent leader in showcasing some of the best web design out there is awards.com. Awards ranks the quality of websites out of 10, giving out a lot of recognition and attention to the winners. But if web design is about creative expression, how can a website's design be quantified, compared, and valued? Is good and bad web design strictly a matter of opinion? Before we answer this question, it's important to break it up into 3 parts so we can understand it better. Web design, good web design, and bad web design. First, what is web design? This question actually isn't as boring as you think. The most common definition of web design refers to the appearance of a website, like fonts, colors, and layouts. However, I think it's more important to realize that web design is far more important than making things pretty on a website. A more proper definition would be that web design would be made up of 2 parts: user interface and user experience. User interface is how aesthetically pleasing things look. User experience is how intuitively and smoothly flowing those things work. Commonly referred to as UI and UX, these 2 concepts themselves go far beyond just web design. Other kinds of design like graphic design, or even more physical types, like product design, all use UI and UX in some way to make someone's experience and quality of a product better. A simple explanation of how UI and UX play a role in our lives are doors. If you see a door, you can usually tell immediately whether or not you have to push or pull the door to go through it. This is the wondrous benefit of good UX, intuitively knowing how to use, without much thought, something with as little effort as possible. And finally, UI is just how aesthetically pleasing the door is. UI and UX are used in web design to make websites aesthetically pleasing and as intuitively performing as possible. Overall, UI is more about interpretation and expression, while UX is more data-driven and factual. Now, understanding that web design is made up of both UI and UX, we can answer the question of what makes good web design and what makes bad web design. In my interpretation, good web design is where you've created something familiar enough to use intuitively, but is unique enough as to be remembered. In other words, good web design would be using a mix of UI and UX to make an intuitively performing and aesthetically pleasing website. This is important because a website can look really nice, but can suffer from a poor user experience, affecting the overall quality of the website. Unfortunately, I see time and time again people prioritizing UI over UX, when UX is far more important. This misconstrues the idea of what good web design really is, because people are basing it off of skewed or trivial criteria for what good web design is and made up of. Why is UX more important than UI, and how does it fit into web design? Going back to our door example, where UX is how you know whether or not to push or pull the door, and UI is how aesthetically pleasing the door is, you begin to see why UX is more important. In the door example, most people don't care what the door looks like. They just want to briefly use it, not think about it, and move on. Time and energy are arguably the most important aspects of our day-to-day life, so how something looks doesn't affect us positively in the same way as when something is energy and time efficient. This is the same way with web design, but harsher. The reality is, for websites, is that you're competing for people's time and energy. The average website's bounce rate could be up to 90% depending on the type of the page. 79% of people scan through text instead of reading it word by word. The first 10 seconds of a page's visit are critical for users' decision to stay or leave. Add this data up and it means that every second is vital to a web page's success. This is why UX is so important in web design, because it fundamentally makes people's lives easier and saves time while doing it. UX must be used to get people where they want to be as fast and as painlessly as possible without any distractions taking away from those valuable seconds. Overall, I think good web design is mainly comprised of good UX while being supported by good UI. Lastly, what's bad web design? Well, this is easy. It's the opposite of good web design. So this would mean bad web design is where you've created something unfamiliar enough to be unintuitive and boring enough as not to be remembered. Overall, bad web design is unintuitive, bland, unfamiliar, and makes it hard to meet the desired goals of its users. For the conclusion, is good and bad web design strictly a matter of opinion? Taking a look at what truly makes good and bad web design, I would say that good and bad web design is not strictly a matter of opinion, because good UX plays a bigger role in good and bad web design than UI does. UX being more factual and backed up by studies makes the quality of web design less about personal opinion and more about what's factually better and quantifiable to judge. I'd also like to reiterate, good web design is not just about making websites look pretty. It's about following proper, statistically proven best practices that make websites easier to use while still being remembered and pleasing to look at.